Millions of people have no problem reading this sign. But what if you're not one of them? What if this was information you needed? Even worse, if your safety depended on understanding this warning, would you know what to do? How about now? When information is critical, it's important that everyone finds it clear and easy to understand. That's the idea behind the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS. Around the world, raw materials travel back and forth across borders, and some of those materials are potentially hazardous. To stay safe, it's critical that workers who come in contact with these chemicals understand how to handle them safely, regardless of where they came from. In this program, we'll discuss what is the GHS, GHS labels, safety data sheets, and safety checklists. More than ever, we live in a global economy, and much of that world economy is built around the use of chemicals. In the United States alone, 650,000 chemicals in the workplace are classified as hazardous, and from their production to their use and transport, they pose a risk to workers and the environment. The challenge is to keep these workers well-informed and safe. Until recently, in the United States and around the world, various agencies met this challenge by developing their own HAZCOM procedures. But these various systems of classifying and labeling chemicals were often in conflict with each other. For example, a substance with acute oral toxicity at this level could be labeled anything from toxic or harmful to not dangerous or non-toxic, depending on the country it was produced in. Making things even more complex, material safety data sheets and container labels, the primary means of relaying this information, could vary so much in layout and design from country to country that they often added to the confusion, making mistakes more likely. With the help of the United States and many other countries, the United Nations developed the GHS to ensure that the handling instructions for hazardous chemicals are clear and easily understood worldwide. The GHS is a non-binding agreement, meaning it's up to each country to decide whether they will adopt it and how it will be implemented. For countries like the United States, transitioning to a new standard has meant retooling a sophisticated regulatory process that's already in place, but the benefits have made it worth the effort. Not only does adopting the GHS allow U.S. companies to remain competitive around the world, but more importantly, it increases safety for workers. To allow for a smoother transition, in the United States, rolling out the new system will take several years. As a worker who will be affected by the changes, there are several dates that have been set by OSHA that you should be aware of. By December 1st, 2013, employers must train workers on the new label elements and SDS format. By June 1st, 2015, chemical manufacturers, importers, distributors, and employers must comply with all the GHS-based changes to the OSHA standard, although distributors have until December 1st, 2015. Before they must discontinue shipping any chemical products that do not have GHS labels. Finally, by June 1, 2016, employers must update alternative workplace labeling and hazard communication programs as necessary and provide additional worker training for newly identified physical and health hazards. What does the GHS look like? The system standardizes two critical areas of hazard communication: how hazardous chemicals are classified and the methods used to communicate those hazards. Breaking it down further, there are three types of hazards: physical, health, and environmental. And there are two types of communication: labels and safety data sheets. More about those later. Under physical hazards, there are 16 categories, 10 categories under health hazards, and environmental hazards has 2. While we won't spend time on each of the 28 categories here, it's worth emphasizing that the chemicals that fit into this list can be very dangerous. Obviously, anyone handling hazardous chemicals must make sure that they know what they're doing to avoid injuring themselves and others. Fortunately, whether a chemical puts you at risk for physical hazards, health hazards, or both, you can protect yourself. And for every chemical classified as hazardous at your worksite, The information you need to stay safe is available to you. When it comes to information about hazardous chemicals, container labels provide a sort of first line of defense. At the source of potential contact with a chemical, a container label provides important information about how to handle that chemical safely. While they're not as informative as safety data sheets, it's critical that an appropriate identifying label is affixed to any container that holds hazardous chemicals. Fortunately, the GHS has simplified interpreting the hazard information on labels by standardizing 3 key label components: symbols, signal words, and hazard statements. Under this system, no matter where a chemical originates from, the same words and symbols are always applied to a specific hazard classification. When looking at a GHS label, the first thing you're likely to notice is the symbol, which is also called a hazard pictogram. This is a graphic representation of the type of hazard present. On container labels in the workplace, pictograms are in the shape of a white diamond and have a red border. Depending on the hazard, one of 9 possible black symbols appears in the center. Among the possible hazards that may be represented by these symbols, oxidizers, flammables, explosives, acute toxicity, corrosives, gases under pressure, carcinogen, environmental toxicity, and irritant. An entirely separate set of pictograms is used for the transport of hazardous materials. More varied in design, they convey a shipped product's potential hazards through symbols, numbers, colors, and background patterns. Signal words are the second element on a GHS label and are used to indicate a hazard's relative level of severity. There are only 2 signal words: danger and warning. Danger is used for more severe hazards. Warning is used for hazards that are less severe. Some lower-level hazards don't use any signal words. Hazard statements are the third element on a GHS label. These standard phrases are assigned to specific hazards based on their class and category. Their purpose is to briefly describe the nature and degree of the hazard. Though the GHS doesn't specify the label's actual layout, these 3 standardized elements, pictograms, signal words, and hazard statements, should always be located together. 4 other important elements also appear on every GHS label. Precautionary statements describe the recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects from hazardous chemicals. In other words, they amount to a briefly worded list of best work practices, such as do not allow contact with air, avoid breathing fumes, keep in original container, and brush off loose particles from skin. Precautionary statements cover 4 areas: prevention, response, in case of accidental spillage or exposure, storage, and disposal. Product identifier is just that, the chemical identity of the substance and proper shipping name. This should match the product identifier found on the safety data sheet. Supplier identification. This is the name, address, and telephone number of the manufacturer or supplier of the substance or mixture. And finally, supplemental information is information not specified or required under the GHS. In some cases, this may be additional safety information such as a chemical's physical state, the routes of exposure, or a hazard not yet incorporated into the GHS. What's new about the GHS's safety data sheet? First off, the name. Prior to the GHS, OSHA typically called this document the Materials Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS. You'll now see it referred to as the Safety Data Sheet, or SDS. But with or without the M on front, the document serves the same purpose. It is a chemicals fact sheet. While container labels are an important source of information, safety data sheets go into much greater detail about a chemical's hazards and how to protect yourself. For this reason, you should consult the safety data sheet for any hazardous chemical you work with. In the past, the format or look of MSDSs was allowed to vary widely. Now, additional information is required and it must be placed within a specific format. The GHS safety data sheet is divided into 16 categories, and the categories appear in the same order on each document, making information easier to find. What are the categories? Here's a brief overview of each. This first section identifies the substance or mixture by product name, lists its recommended uses, and provides the supplier's contact information, including address and phone number. The next section contains the GHS hazard classification for the substance or mixture, along with hazards not covered by the GHS, such as dust explosion. Elements from the container labels, such as precautionary statements and hazard symbols, also appear in this section. By the way, if you're familiar with the NFPA HMIS system of classification, you may have noticed a difference here. Under the old system, hazardous chemicals were ranked from 1 to 4, with the higher numbers indicating a more severe hazard. Under the GHS, however, the classifications go in the opposite direction. Level 4 is less hazardous, Level 1 more hazardous. In Section 3, the material's chemical identity is listed, along with its common name, and such identifiers as its CAS and EC numbers. If the product is a mixture, all hazardous ingredients are listed along with their concentrations. Section 4 contains information on first aid procedures. These are broken down by routes of exposure. For example, what should be done if a toxic substance is inhaled is detailed separately from what should be done if the same substance gets into a worker's eyes or is ingested. In the next section, appropriate methods and extinguishing agents for fighting fires involving the chemical are listed, along with methods that should be avoided. Also listed, hazards specific to that chemical igniting, such as the release of dangerous gases, and the protective equipment and precautions that firefighters should use. Section 6 details what steps should be taken if an accidental release occurs, any special protective equipment that needs to be donned, the emergency procedures that should be followed, and the methods and materials for containment and cleanup. Section 7 provides information on handling the chemical safely. Critical safety precautions, such as avoid breathing vapor and keep chemical away from ignition sources, are found here. Information on storing the chemical safely is also located in this section, including any incompatibility with other stored materials. In Section 8, safe exposure limits are provided, along with appropriate methods to reduce a worker's exposure, such as engineering controls and personal protective equipment. Important physical and chemical properties are listed in Section 9, including odor threshold, evaporation rate, and flash point. Section 10 deals with stability and reactivity. In other words, how stable is the chemical, and are hazardous reactions to incompatible materials or specific environmental conditions a possibility? Section 11 provides a concise but complete description of the various health effects caused by contact with the chemical. Information includes likely routes of exposure and the symptoms and illnesses that can develop. For information on the potential impact of a chemical on the environment, look in Section 12, which contains such ecological information as a chemical's ecotoxicity, bioaccumulative potential, and mobility in soil. Section 13 focuses on proper disposal of leftover waste material, including the disposal of any contaminated packaging. In Section 14, the information needed to transport a chemical is supplied: the UN number, the proper shipping name, whether the chemical is a marine pollutant, and other applicable information. Safety, health, and environmental regulations that pertain to the chemical are listed in Section 15. And Section 16 provides a catch-all location for any other information that may be useful to have on the document, including information on the preparation and revision of the safety data sheet. The GHS helps create a safer work environment by providing consistent safety information. But information alone isn't enough. To stay safe, workers must act on that information, maintaining a daily awareness of potential hazards and following correct safety procedures every time a task is performed. Having a checklist of best work practices can help you keep on track during the routine of everyday job tasks. While your own checklist may vary depending on the type of work you do and the chemicals you work with, here are safety measures that anyone who handles hazardous chemicals must be aware of. Know where your facility's SDSs are kept. Comply with each chemical's SDS information. Use only properly labeled containers. Use appropriate PPE when needed. Understand what to do in case of an emergency. Know the location of all eye wash and emergency shower stations in your area. Report every chemical spill, leak, and accident. And if information is unclear or you have questions, ask your supervisor. Communication is only effective if the end user understands it. When mistakes can turn a potential hazard into a very real danger, you need to know how to stay safe. That's why the GHS was developed, to make the critical information on container labels and safety data sheets clear and easy to understand. By using this information and following your facility's best work practices, you can protect yourself and your coworkers. The GHS helps create a safer work environment by providing consistent safety information. But information alone isn't enough. To stay safe, workers must act on that information, maintaining a daily awareness of potential hazards and following correct safety procedures every time a task is performed. Having a checklist of best work practices can help you keep on track during the routine of everyday job tasks. While your own checklist may vary depending on the type of work you do and the chemicals you work with, here are safety measures that anyone who handles hazardous chemicals must be aware of. Know where your facility's SDSs are kept. Comply with each chemical's SDS information. Use only properly labeled containers. Use appropriate PPE when needed. Understand what to do in case of an emergency. Know the location of all eye wash and emergency shower stations in your area. Report every chemical spill, leak, and accident. And if information is unclear or you have questions, ask your supervisor. Communication is only effective if the end user understands it. When mistakes can turn a potential hazard into a very real danger, you need to know how to stay safe. That's why the GHS was developed, to make the critical information on container labels and safety data sheets clear and easy to understand. By using this information and following your facility's best work practices, you can protect yourself and your coworkers.